everyone, and welcome to today's Level Up webinar. I am Michaela, joined by the lovely Marissa, and we are very excited to be continuing this series with a little bit of a twist to it this time. So we'll be having one webinar per month designed around a different topic each time for business leaders to strategically level up their business game. And of course, we'll be talking about building the tech into your normal business operations. But to shake things up a little, we will also be bringing in guest speakers who are actual experts on the topics, have an interview with them, and get some insight to help level up your business game even more.
That's right. And we'll also publish a cheat code to our website and YouTube. It's a short how-to video designed to help your team members build their technology skills using some of the tools that we've talked about in the webinar.
So to start us off today, I just want to mention a couple of quick tools and then we'll kick it off. So these are pre-recorded conversations. However, we are here live with you in the chat box. So please feel free to chat and ask us any questions throughout so we can address all of the things that you really want to hear about. Feel free to ask them whenever you think of them, even if they're not necessarily relevant to the content that we're on at that specific moment. We're more than happy to answer them whenever. And one last thing before we officially kick it off, the webinar will be available as a recording after the fact. So you'll get a link via email early next week with the recording that you're absolutely more than welcome to share with other people inside your office or within your network that you feel would benefit from the content. So with that, let's get started.
Let's level up.
We are here today to chat about cloud security and keeping your business secure with Microsoft 365.
That is right. There are so many features built into the Microsoft 365 subscriptions to help keep your data safe. And you can, you can add on licenses to your Microsoft subscription, or maybe you buy an elevated subscription that has all of the things more built in. This is because of this shift in the way that we work and where we work, how we work. We need to shift the way that our organization is protecting our assets. And that means looking beyond kind of this traditional perimeter. We no longer are just securing through a firewall for this in the safety of an office. Now we're going beyond that firewall and into the cloud with our data. And so there's much for us to talk about today.
That is correct. And to help us out with all of that information, we have brought in an expert with us today. We have Rob. So Rob, if you want to introduce yourself and give us a little more insight into what you do.
Hi, so my name's Rob. I am an onboarding project lead at WorkSmart. I've been with WorkSmart for about 4 years now, and on top of the onboarding project load that I do, I'm one of the go-to guys for Microsoft 365.
That is true. I like to pick his brain.
Nice. Go-to guys. Well, awesome. We will jump right into the question. So the first question I have for you today, it's something we've talked about a lot. One of the biggest cybersecurity threats today comes from phishing emails. So training can help your team stay vigilant and on kind of spotting those scams coming in. But there's also technology within the Microsoft ecosystem that can provide even more protection than just training your team. Can you talk a little bit more about what organizations can do within Microsoft 365 as their email provider to reduce the risk of those phishing emails?
Absolutely. So built into Microsoft 365 with your Exchange Online features that give you your email hosting, there are some anti-phishing policies built in and settings that you can configure. They'll look out for things like spoofed email addresses. So if somebody pretends that they're sending email from your domain, ours being worksmart.com, if they were sending from their own server to us and saying that it was from worksmart.com, 365 is going to catch that with any of the built-in plans that you can have. So that is available for free for everybody. If you take it to the next level and get a plan or an add-on that includes Defender for Office 365, You can enhance those anti-phishing policies to gain extra functionality, such as impersonation protection, which is if a domain looks similar to your domain, so they're not spoofing it and saying it's coming from worksmart.com. Maybe they're saying it's coming from something that looks like worksmart.com, like if they substitute a 0 for the O, for example, then the impersonation protections with Defender for Office 365 will kick in and protect you against those specific kinds of intrusions. Beyond that, you can protect even individual email addresses. So if your CEO is named Clay and somebody was sending mail from like CL4Y instead of CALY at worksmart.com, it's going to catch that type of impersonation as well. On top of anti-phishing with Defender for Office 365, you get some additional functions such as safe links and safe attachments. And those are functions that will take URLs for websites that are sent to you in an email and rewrite them so that when you click on them, it goes through a Microsoft server that is checking that website to see if it's malicious and then stops your users from going to it. So that helps prevent situations where you might go to a website that is pretending to be a Microsoft login page or even a box.com login page or Dropbox or any other service out there that could be a target for a phishing attempt to get your password for that service. The safe links protection will prevent you from getting to that malicious website and accidentally typing in your address for that or your password and username for that. Save Attachments does a similar thing where it scans all of the attachments coming into your email. It'll take the attachment, hold on to it, detonate it in what's called a sandbox environment where it runs and tries to execute that attachment to see if anything malicious happens in the sandbox environment before it actually lets it go into your mailbox. If it's caught, you have a couple of options. You can either just replace the attachment with a placeholder that says we scanned this and it was found to be malicious, or you can stop the entire email just in case the content of the email itself had anything else that might be in there that might cause some confusion or, again, have malicious intent behind it. And that safe links and safe attachments actually carries through beyond email into your Office desktop apps and Teams. So that helps capture and protect all of the different places that you use in 365.
I find it so fascinating because when we educate employees on what a scam email might look like, we talk about looking at the email address, the actual email address, not just the display name. We talk about being thoughtful about links and attachments. And so it's nice to know that Microsoft also has the intelligence and the technology built in to also can layer that protection. So that's cool. Of course, it's cool. I very seldom say like, not cool, Microsoft 365. But in that kind of the same sense that we're talking about things that our people, our employees are responsible for helping us to maintain security, like being vigilant in email. It's also on the password side. That's passwords are like the oldest security measure on the internet. And we've talked about over and over again about strong password requirements. We've talked about complexity and requiring characters and making sure there's a length requirement. So with all of that, still, passwords are a risk. And I'm curious, like, what are some of those risks that come to mind for you with password?
Yeah, so right away, one of the fallbacks to what I was just talking about with the anti-phishing protections comes just accidentally giving up your password on a website that's pretending to be some other website, whether it's your Microsoft 365 login page or Box, Dropbox, even Google, Amazon, anything, your bank, any of those websites can be spoofed and pretending to be a legitimate entity that you might use. You go in, you type in your username and password. No matter how complex or advanced your password might be, it's given up now. And anywhere else that you use that same password is doomed to be compromised as well. So that's one of the reasons that it's a common suggestion to not reuse passwords anywhere, no matter how complex or unique they might be. If it's reused somewhere else, it's given up once. Anywhere else that is used can fall victim to the same issue. So that's why one of the best protections that you can get for your account is to turn on multi-factor authentication, or MFA.
And, natural segue, multi-factor authentication helps control, like you said, who gets access to your system. Unfortunately, though, it's often not deployed or implemented at small businesses because it's seen as being disruptive. Putting in a password, why can't that be strong enough? Why do I have to go through these other hoops? What advice, Rob, I'm sure you've had these conversations before, what advice do you have for folks when it comes to properly deploying multi-factor authentication?
So one of the things that I like to recommend is communicating the change ahead of time, letting your users know, hey, we're going to be deploying multi-factor authentication on whatever the date is that you plan to make that cutover, and just providing them some guidance about why it's important and the advantages that it's going to give you in protecting your account, and why it's necessary to protect those things. Something that also helps is that a lot of companies and different entities are starting to deploy MFA without giving you any option. Most banks are getting to the point where they're enforcing MFA, even if it's just sending a text message with a code to verify, rather than having you use an application to get that one-time password or a push notification or something. So reminding folks that it's coming and plenty of other places are using it, it is the way that we're going to protect your accounts going forward. So,
and there is some technology and kind of advancement with multi-factor authentication throughout the years. That traditionally was you had to have a hard token, physical token, where you would take the code, and that way it was on your body, and you put it in as your second factor. Now we have, like you said, there's that one-time password that goes to text messages or like your authenticator app on your phone. So there's more methods available to help kind of reduce the burden, if you will. Is there anything else that can be done in the back end that can help, again, reduce, is there a way to authenticate behind the scenes?
So there's a couple of things that you can do to ease the burden of multi-factor authentication. One of those options that you can get in Microsoft 365 is Conditional Access, and that's included with any plan that includes Azure Active Directory Premium. With Conditional Access, you can specify specific rules about when somebody might have to pass a multi-factor authentication challenge. So instead of having to pass it every single time they sign in, you can say if they're in the office behind our public IP address, then they don't have to pass a multi-factor challenge. If they're on a trusted device because it's joined to our Azure Active Directory, they don't necessarily have to pass an MFA challenge. But you can also get more granular that even if they're on a trusted device, maybe they're outside of the office on that trusted device, but maybe they have admin privileges and they're going into the management portal to change another user's password or provide a reset link or something, then you can set policies with conditional access that will still cause them to have to pass that multi-factor challenge, so that if their account happened to be compromised, their device was also stolen, and somebody then was trying to just use their saved credentials on their laptop to get in and do something malicious against another user account, or even create their own user account that hacker can now use later on to get back into the system. If the victim of the stolen laptop has to pass an MFA challenge because of conditional access to perform the functions like creating an account, then that challenge will still happen. So that's something that conditional access gives you to, one, make it a little bit easier, but also gain more control and put in more advanced situations.
So the simplest answer is you can do basically what your organization needs. So it's really just it's a custom setup based on your actual needs and requirements. Sounds like everything else Microsoft 365.
Yep.
Now, I'm sure there are people who are listening to our conversation and they're like, yeah, Rob and the rest of Michaela, got it. We're using multi-factor authentication. We're confident in our password practices. We're training our users. We've got advanced threat protection, or what's now known as Defender from Office 365. And they're following those best practices that we recommend. Is there something more security-wise that we can do to make sure that there are no bad actors inside the system, so that, we can maybe be aware of potential breaches?
Sure. So with security overall, you do need to take a layered approach, because any given layer is going to have its potential to be compromised. So one of the final pieces that you can take after implementing all of the controls and policies and restrictions is to have a monitoring system in place, such as a Security Operations Center, or SOC, as a service. One that we partner with is Arctic Wolf. So what they'll do is connect to a 365 tenant and monitor for any actions being taken that seem out of character or out of place, so that if those things are happening, something, one of those other layers was compromised and somebody's account was compromised, even though they had MFA and everything else going on. Sometimes things just don't work out the way we want them to, and a hacker gets in, they start doing suspicious things. Something like Arctic Wolf is going to catch those things and send alerts to us, and then we'll help you address those issues.
So it's detection and response, essentially, for the things outside of your office. So using that same approach that we kind of talked about at the beginning, which is the traditional security environment has been on the office and the things inside your office. Now we're just opening that up to the cloud so we can see what's going on there in a similar fashion.
Yeah, absolutely. And the new perimeter is essentially your users. Because they can work anywhere at any time, they're not restricted to the office anymore, then you need to protect your users, and that's where MFA comes in, conditional access, to make it a little bit less cumbersome and to put in more specific policies around it to control those actions. And then again, something like Arctic Wolf to monitor for anything that potentially happens after the fact anyway, and then to get a response and take action as needed.
And there was one more thing that I wanted to ask you about, and it probably would have made sense to ask you around the time we were talking about passwords. We've spent a lot of time talking about authentication, what gives people access, how we make sure that their identity is verified. What about devices? We have traditionally had Active Directory and physical domain servers in the office to help manage the hardware of the devices that are accessing. What can be done with the Microsoft 365 for that?
So with 365, you can actually, in some ways, replace that on-premises infrastructure of Active Directory and domain controllers, provided you're not at the point anymore where you have any legacy applications that are dependent on traditional Active Directory. If all of your stuff is already out in the cloud, or you can get to a point that everything's out in the cloud, you can actually take your workstations, your laptops, your desktops, and join those to Azure Active Directory, which is what's behind the scenes of Microsoft 365, to control your identity and access. Once those devices are joined, you can apply policies for managing some aspects of the controls that are in place for those. They become those trusted devices that can be used in conditional access, but you can also enroll them in Intune if you have a Microsoft 365 plan that either includes that or you've added something on that includes it. And with Intune, you gain additional controls over those devices and policies that are applied to them. If you need some specific requirement around the idle screen time, if after 5 minutes the device is inactive, you want to lock it so that if somebody's walked away from it, it prevents somebody from just taking it and going with it and running away and being able to gain access to things. You can also enhance some of the level of security with the conditional access for making sure that it's meeting those compliance requirements for the lock screen time or password rotations, things like that. And as long as the device is healthy in that state, then the conditional access policy can apply one way or the other. Yeah.
I listened and I heard a remnants of mobile device management, MDM, and it's a much bigger concept than mobile device management. And I want to ask so many questions about it, but I think we'll definitely take too much of a tangent. So we'll have to have you back so we can talk more about that specifically.
We'll do a part 2 with Rob.
Yeah, right. Hey,
come back to part 2.
Happy to come back anytime.
Well, Well, we definitely appreciate you joining us today. That was a ton of great information. And if anyone watching would like to learn more about Microsoft 365 or any of the topics that we talked about here today, you can check out our website here for more information with some blogs and videos that go a lot more in depth about these topics. So with that, I believe that is all we have on Microsoft 365 today, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
All right, so the high reward for cybercrime makes it likely that you will experience a security incident at some point. So in addition to protecting your organization from cyber attack by preventing it with security measures like antivirus and all that, it's also important to talk about protecting your organization with an insurance policy that can help you recover your operations in the event of a cyber
That's
attack.
correct.
And that is why we have brought in the expert, Ralph Whitehurst Jr. from Triangle Risk Advisors, to talk with us today about managing your risks with cyber insurance. So to kick us off, Ralph, if you want to just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about what you do.
So thank you for having me on today. I really appreciate it. Ralph Whitehurst Jr. of Triangle Risk Advisors. Home base is out of Lewisburg. I'm in Wake Forest, North Carolina. So cyber is an interesting animal. There's not any real what I'd call standardization in the industry. Every company has somewhat different forms, which really kind of makes it a challenge for people that aren't in the insurance business to try to pick and choose what it is they do need. But I guess to kind of put it in layman's terms would be cyber liability insurance protects the organization, as you were talking about, from cyber liability attacks inwardly or outwardly. They could come in and attack you. And the reason it's required or needed is because your general liability policy only covers things, or your property policies, from tangible damage to your property. So your property, if you had a tree hit your building and it damaged your computer systems, that would be covered under your property policy. But the problem with cyber insurance is the computer still looks okay, but the reality is it's not, because it's been damaged from a virus or something that's otherwise made it unreliable or not working at all. So cyber liability fills that exclusion. So when you get into cyber liability, you get into a host of different things that I'm sure you're going to be asking me some questions on in a few minutes to talk about. But that's the reason you need a separate policy, is because your property policy doesn't cover intangible damages.
Awesome.
So then what specifically would you say, if you could give us like a really, I know it's hard to give us an example of what cyber insurance is because policies vary, but what is cyber insurance?
So cyber insurance, first party cyber would be damage internally, and it's shut my computer system down and it's unworkable. So if I'm a factory, as an example, and I have machinery with that upload and download from the web, and somebody came in there and attacked it and shut my business down, I'm kind of dead in the water without my machinery functioning properly. That's just one example. Obviously, for us, we're a good example. We rely so much on computers that if they were shut down, we don't have paper files anymore. So anything from outside that's impacting me internally would be my first party liability coverages from that. And then, of course, I might have file systems, electronic file systems, i.e. doctor's offices, lawyers, insurance, realtors, where you have huge databases of sensitive computer information. You might have socials in there. You have, you may have driver's license number in our case. You might have dates of birth, things that hackers from the outside would like to get their hands on, i.e. including medical records, which are extremely valuable out there in the wild, wild west of the dark web. So having coverage for that, if I were to get sued from somebody outside where I damaged them, emotionally or made it very difficult. Again, we're not talking bodily injury or property damage. We're talking about intrinsic damages. So they come back and they sue me. There's coverage for that as well. Interestingly, when I talk to people, another piece that's usually a limiting coverage, but it's very, very critical to have, or at least consider it, is this actually happened to us about 11 years ago, and I don't mind talking about it. My wife is at the other end of the building. She's about 80 feet away, and one Monday morning about 7:30, because we get here pretty early, she says, "Ralph, could you come here for a minute? The money's gone out of one of our accounts." And I said, "What do you mean the money's gone?" And so I went sprinting down there, and she says, "Look," she turns the computers around. She had 3 monitors on her desk, and she says, "Look, most of the money's gone." I said, "Well, what happened to it?" That's what I think most people would do. Well, long story made short, over the weekend, hackers had gotten into and stolen money from those accounts. Now, the reason I bring this up is because people assume that if that were to happen to them, that the bank is always going to make them whole again. And unless the breach came through the bank, which in our case, the good news is it did. So we were made whole again by the banks or by the bank. But if they came through here and put, say, a keystroke program in your computer and you don't know sharing your passwords, and then later they steal your money, usually when they're getting into your savings account and your checking accounts, that's a company's cash flow. So if you take my cash flow away, you've damaged my ability to potentially do business. So computer fraud or funds transfer is usually an option that's available with most cyber policies. And you can buy varying limits of anywhere from 25 or 50,000 to as much as $500,000 or more, depending on the circumstances. So that's a huge first party hit that people are very vulnerable to.
So I know in insurance, you can kind of navigate and calculate the right policy for you by adding and kind of removing things.
Right.
And I imagine that business disruption and ransomware payments are probably major expenses that people are going to want, or companies are going to want to have covered. To set realistic expectations, can you talk more about what cyber insurance policies typically cover in terms of the incidents and risks?
So business interruption insurance is obviously very critical. And most of the policies out there embed that in the limit. Either give you, they'll either pick a limit like $1 million. Most cyber policies that we write for our clients are $1 million. Some require more than that. Some feel like this is the first time they've bought it and they want to tiptoe into the water, and so maybe they'll buy a $500,000 limit. So usually you'll have a separate limit for business interruption insurance of i.e. $500,000, which is going to follow the first party liability in most cases. What was the other question you had?
Ransomware payments, is that something that's covered by cyber liability insurance?
That's a great question. Ransomware is usually excluded under most policies, and you have to buy it back. Again, I'm talking kind of generically because every policy form is a little different, but you might get subsets of $50, $100, $250,000. Some of the policies out there will give you more than that, but what you've got to have in order to get these type of coverages, the carriers, the underwriters are getting much more restrictive about just offering them to anybody. So they're looking for things like two-factor authentication. They're looking for robust firewalls. They're looking for having security, maybe two-factor authentication on the Internet of Things. Your phones. Everybody, I'm talking on my phone now. So people rely so much externally on their other, whether it's a laptop or a phone or an iPad. They're looking for security there too. They also want to make sure that you're training your employees, having a cyber policy available, a social media policy. Those are the type of things that we will try to add value for our clients where we'll provide those to them, and we'll even do some training if they'd like us to help them with that, because the carriers are wanting to see more and more of that. So they want to make sure that you're mitigating the risk as much as possible, and then your last resort would be the transfer and have the carrier, actually the insurance company, pay for this.
When it comes to ransomware, we could probably talk all day.
Yeah.
Because we value the security measures that get put into place. In that same vein, we're talking about ransomware and cybersecurity risk growing. And I saw somewhere that said the premiums and deductibles are rising because of that. And I saw somewhere that could be 20 to 50% rate increases throughout 2021 if the trends continue at an accelerated pace. So what are things that are affecting a company's cost to cyber insurance?
Well, it's just so much more of it seems like, and the small business, and I'll define what I mean by small business. Small business, in my mind, is anybody with less than 250 employees. So that's a relatively large business, but it's a small business in the scope of, the world economy. We're so connected across the world. We're not just dealing with, locally dealing with people and having clients locally, but we're also reaching out. Commerce is much greater. I mean, it's very easy with the internet to deal with somebody, with the click of a mouse that's halfway around the world. So, because of that, there's still a little bit of naivety, maybe is not the right word, but there's a naivety with talking to business leaders and business owners about the need to have cyber. They feel like if they, not everybody certainly, but more people do feel like, well, I've got the things you've been talking about in this webinar, Ralph. I don't feel like I can be hacked. And I jokingly say, guys, listen, if the Federal Reserve can be hacked, if the Pentagon can be hacked, if the White House can be hacked, I'm pretty sure that we can be hacked no matter what we might do. So people are coming around more to that and seeing the need for cyber. A few years ago, when I would talk to clients and prospects, for that matter, about cyber, most people are like, I think I'm okay, Ralph. And it's kind of expensive, but it has increased. The premiums are up, anywhere from 10% to 25 or 30% year over year. To your point, Marissa, you're exactly right. And it's because of the security is playing kind of catch up with the smaller businesses. It's just not as great, but there's certainly a lot being done in that field to help us as small business owners.
What about any industries or limiting factors for coverage? Are there any specific insight you can share there?
Well, I'll tell you, medical, hospitals, municipalities, doctors' offices, lawyers, professional, are having a little greater challenge with getting insurance. Certainly not impossible at all, but there's more limited markets. Whereas you look at a Main Street business, you're going to have, many options available. But when you get into anything that's defense related, they're going to have challenges with there too. Those would be the primaries: aviation, aircraft, drones, a little more specialized. Again, it's possible, but it's going to be a little more restrictive in the marketplace.
And then, of course,
and they're going to need good security in place too for that.
I should have just let you say it. I was so excited to say it because we like to remind folks how important the right IT security policies and all the preventative measures are. And you had mentioned the multi-factor authentication. Monitored backups is another thing that we encourage throughout our client base and prospects, because that is for the cost. It helps drive down the cost of cyber insurance, and we strongly believe that cyber insurance is an important layer to cybersecurity. And I've dominated the conversation. So Michaela, was there anything that you wanted to pick Ralph's brain on?
Well, you definitely gives a lot of.
It's a tiny brain, so
I won't get too hard. Well, I guess the only thing I really have is, do you have any advice at all for just kind of making sure you have the right policy in place, and making sure that, you have what you need?
Yeah, I do. Cyber insurance can be purchased a couple of different ways. One very common way, and when people really don't talk much about cyber at their policy renewals, sometimes, just as a catch-all, our industry will throw a little bit in under their package policy. You might get a 10, 25, maybe as much as $100,000 worth of coverage. It's usually first party only, usually doesn't have third party. It can. It may not have forensic accounting, which when you have a mess in here, you have to have the CPAs come in, and they charge a lot of money to figure out what's going on. They're about $850 an hour is what I think their going rate for those guys is now. And you can expect to spend between $15,000 and $25,000 to have them in here and figure out why you got hacked. So those policies are kind of a Band-Aid. They're better than nothing. But if you truly want to protect yourself the correct way, you really need an outside separate cyber liability policy, in my humble opinion. That would be the best advice I could give somebody. And listen to your IT company when they talk to you about, whether it's two-factor authentication. You said monitor, mirroring, monitor backup, robust firewalls. Update your software on a regular basis. Have it set up automatically. Train your employees, to at least be wise to these crafty, sneaky phishing emails. I probably get them a couple times a week in spite of everything. And they're getting very, very good at that. And you really can't control what's being done within your organization. Somebody can be tired one morning and maybe not as alert to a phishing attempt. Not constant, but regular training. And if you train annually and you bring new people in, make sure you train them too. Because a lot of times that gets missed until, the following year, and you could get somebody a month after training and go 11 months without training somebody. So make sure that you're doing that, and make sure that you've got at least passwords on your phones. So if you were to lose one, they can't just open your phone and have a field day with it.
Awesome. Well, that was a ton of great, easy, simple tips to implement. So appreciate you sharing that with us. Thank you again for joining us today. That was a lot of great insight into cyber insurance and how important it is for today's big web world. And if anyone wants to learn more about this topic, you can reach out directly to Ralph here. We'll put his contact information here so you can reach out. And I believe that is all we have for cyber insurance. So thank you again for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the webinar and that you got a lot of good information out of it. If you have any last-minute questions, feel free to send them in the chat now, and we will answer them for you. You can also contact either Marissa or myself at our emails listed here on the screen. We're always looking for suggestions and topic ideas that you all want to hear about, so feel free to send us any feedback. Be sure and stay tuned for the cheat code coming out soon, which you will be able to watch on our blog or on our social media pages. We also will have the registration details coming out soon for our upcoming webinars, so stay tuned for all of that as well. And with that being said, thank you all again for hanging out with us today, and see you next time.
See ya.